Steel composure, she turned back to him, looking at him for real this time. Thank you, Andre wiped his hands on his jeans. Yeah. Then he checked the time, 15 minutes late. His stomach sank. The interview was over before it had begun for a second. He just stood there staring at the time, feeling that weight of everything slip right through his fingers. Then he turned back to his bike. There was nothing else to do, but before he could start the engine, her voice stopped him. You were on your way somewhere. Important, she said, not a question, a realization. Andre exhaled, shaking his head. Not any more silence then. To his complete surprise, she reached into her bag and pulled out a card. She pressed it into his palm before he could protest. Call me, she said firmly. He barely glanced at the name before stuffing it into his pocket. I don't need, just call me. And with that, she stepped into her car, shifted into gear, and disappeared into the flow of traffic. Andre stood there, the street buzzing around him, his future gone in a matter of minutes. A bitter laugh slipped past his lips. He had just thrown away his one shot at something better. Or so he thought. The morning light spilled through the blinds, painting slanted lines across the worn wooden floor. Andre Lawson lay on his bed, one arm draped over his forehead, staring at the cracked ceiling like it held the answer to a question he wasn't sure how to ask. His phone vibrated against the nightstand. He didn't need to look. He already knew. With a slow breath, he reached over, swiping the screen. Thank you for your application. Unfortunately, we have decided to move forward with other candidates. Andrew closed his eyes. He let the weight of the words settle over him, pressing into his chest with the dull familiarity of disappointment. He'd known this was coming. He had missed the interview. He had made his choice. Still knowing didn't make it any easier to swallow. He tossed the phone onto the bed beside him, exhaling sharply. He needed a new plan. He couldn't afford to sit here, wallowing. Rent was due in two weeks, and he sure as hell wasn't about to call his mother and tell her he'd screwed up again. His gaze flicked across the nightstand, and that's when he saw it, a small rectangle of thick, expensive card stock, a business card. Victoria Lennox, CEO, Lennox Company. Andre sat up, card flipping between his fingers. He didn't know why he'd kept it. He told himself he wasn't going to call. He wasn't interested in charity. He wasn't going to grovel for some favor just because he changed a damn battery. But as the minutes dragged on, the card felt heavier in his palm, as if daring him to take the risk. His thumb hovered over the number. Then before he could second-guess himself, he pressed dial. The line barely rang twice before a voice answered. You called? Andre cleared his throat, suddenly aware of the tightness in his chest. She sounded almost expectant, like she had been waiting. Yeah, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. You gave me your card. A pause. Then, did you get the job? He let out a humorless chuckle. Didn't make it to the interview. Silence. Then, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, she said, come to my office now. Andre blinked. Wait, what? It wasn't a request. And then she hung up. Andre stared at his phone. What the hell was going on? 20 minutes later, he stood in the towering glass lobby of Lennox Company, shifting uncomfortably under the sharp gaze of the receptionist. He didn't belong here. The marble floors gleamed under fluorescent light, polished to a mirror finish. Men in tailored suits and women in designer heels moved through the space with effortless confidence, barely sparing him a glance. He felt like an outsider before he'd even taken a step. Name? The receptionist asked, looking at him over the rim of her designer glasses. Andre Lawson. Her brow furrowed slightly, like the name meant nothing to her. Do you have an appointment? I think so. He wasn't sure what to call whatever this was before she could respond. A voice cut through the tension. Mr. Lawson is expected. Andre turned. A woman in a sleek black suit stood by the elevators, holding a tablet against her chest. Her tone was clipped, professional, and entirely uninterested in pleasantries. Follow me, she said. Andre hesitated for half a second before stepping in behind her. The elevator ride was silent, the soft chime of the floors passing the only sound between them. Then the doors slid open to the top floor. The office was nothing like the cold, lifeless corporate spaces he had imagined. It was sharp, modern, dominant, floor to ceiling. On a busy street in New York, a black man hurried to an important job interview that could change his life. But when he came across a woman exhausted and helpless by the side of the road, he chose to stop and help her fix her car, even though he knew for sure he would be late for the interview. While feeling hopeless for letting such a rare opportunity slip away, he suddenly received an offer, one that opened a door even greater than anything he had ever imagined, from the very woman he had helped. The day before, the city hummed with restless energy as the evening traffic crawled forward, headlights casting fleeting reflections on the wet pavement. The air smelled of damp asphalt and exhaust, a mix of summer heat and the lingering aftermath of rain. Andrew Lawson gripped the handlebars of his old motorcycle, weaving cautiously between the stopped cars. This was at the interview. He had waited months for this opportunity, had studied every angle of Lennox Company, memorized their annual reports, practiced Answering every possible question. He wasn't just going in for another job, this was his shot at something real. Something that could finally pull him out of the endless cycle of temporary gigs and being overlooked. The light flicked green, and he accelerated, eyes darting to the glowing numbers on his dashboard. 25 minutes, enough time to park, check himself in, and walk into that interview looking like he belonged there. Then he saw her. A black Tesla sat motionless in the middle of the street, hazard lights blinking frantically, traffic funneled around it, honks blaring as impatient drivers swerved past. But what caught Andre's attention wasn't the car, it was the woman standing beside it. She was tall, sharply dressed with a crisp blazer that looked like it cost more than his rent. Her sleek blonde hair framed a face that radiated power, except now that face was tight with frustration. Her phone gripped white-knuckled in one hand. She was stuck, and no one was stopping to help. Andre's hands tightened on the handlebars. Not his problem, he had somewhere to be. His mind screamed at him to keep going. This wasn't his fight. He'd been in the city long enough to know how things worked. A black man on a beat-up bike stopping to help a white woman in a luxury car. He could already imagine the suspicion in her eyes, the way her body would tense up the second he approached. If the roles were reversed, would she stop for him? The thought made something bitter rise in his throat. He should go. He should just go. 23 minutes, and yet he couldn't. With a sharp turn of the handlebars, Andre cut across the lane and rolled to a stop beside the Tesla. The woman's head snapped up, eyes narrowing the moment she registered him there. It was that flicker of hesitation, that moment of calculation, weighing whether he was here to help or to take something from her. Andre forced himself to stay neutral, ignoring the way his chest burned at the look in her eyes. Car trouble. His voice was steady, as if he hadn't already predicted the reaction. For a beat, she said nothing. Her gaze flicked over him, the leather jacket, the calloused hands, the old bike parked too close to her pristine car. Her face hardened. "I've called roadside assistance," she said coolly, like she was trying to end the conversation before it began. Andre huffed a quiet laugh. "Of course she had." He gestured toward the car. "You sure you want to wait? You're blocking the whole street." She pressed her lips together, as if the reality of her situation had just now fully set in. Her gaze dropped to her phone. No service. Her jaw tensed. Andre saw at the exact moment she realized she didn't have a choice. "It won't start," she admitted, like the words physically hurt her to say. He nodded, already stepping toward the hood poppet. She hesitated again, like the idea of trusting him with her car was a bridge too far. Andre didn't have time for this. He rolled his eyes. "Lady, if I wanted to steal your damn Tesla, I wouldn't do it in the middle of rush hour." That seemed to snap her out of it. With a tight breath, she moved to the driver's seat and pressed the release button. The hood lifted with a quiet hiss. Andre scanned the engine. He wasn't a mechanic, but years of fixing up his own junker had taught him enough to recognize a problem when he saw one. A loose battery terminal. An easy fix. He reached in, fingers working fast. Sweat dripped down his temple as he adjusted the cable, tightening it back into place. The city moved around them, the steady noise of car horns and passing voices dulling into the background. A few minutes later, he stepped back. "Try it now." The woman slid into the driver's seat, pressing the start button. The Tesla rumbled back to life. Relief flickered across her face, but it was quickly masked by her usual